If someone had told me that the people who carried my father's coffin would be the same people who tried to steal everything he left behind, I would never have believed them. Because no matter how many arguments families have, I always believed blood came before money. I was wrong. Very wrong. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 33 years old. And this is the story of how my own family buried my father, then tried to bury me with his secrets. But they forgot one thing. My father was always 3 steps ahead of everyone, including them. My father, Richard Carter, was the kind of man everyone respected. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't famous. But he built one of the most successful construction companies in our county from nothing. He always said, "Money can build a house, but only honesty can build a home." Growing up, I was always closer to him than anyone else. Every Saturday, he'd take me to construction sites. He taught me how to read blueprints, how to negotiate, how to recognize people who smiled with their mouths, but not with their eyes. Back then, I didn't understand why he kept saying that. Years later, those words would save my life. My mother, Margaret, had changed after my father became successful. Luxury became her addiction. Designer handbags, expensive vacations, private clubs. Nothing was ever enough. My older brother, Ethan, was exactly like her. He loved shortcuts, easy money, fast success. He joined Dad's company, not because he loved the business, but because he loved the lifestyle. Then there was my younger sister, Sophia. She rarely made decisions herself. She simply followed whoever seemed strongest. Most of the time, that was Ethan. Unlike them, I chose a different path. After college, I became an architect. Instead of working for Dad, I built my own career. Dad respected that. He often smiled and said, "One day, you'll build something no one can take from you." I thought he was talking about buildings. Now I know. He meant something much bigger. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday morning. My phone rang at 5:42 a.m. It was the hospital. The doctor's voice sounded calm. Too calm. "Ms. Carter, I'm very sorry. Your father passed away early this morning." I don't remember dropping my phone. I don't remember driving. I only remember standing beside his hospital bed, holding his cold hand, hoping he would open his eyes one last time. He didn't. The funeral was 3 days later. Hundreds of people came. Employees, friends, neighbors, business partners. Everyone spoke about the kind man who had helped them. My brother cried louder than anyone. My mother could barely stand. Sophia hugged everyone. From the outside, we looked like the perfect grieving family. But something felt wrong. Very wrong. During the funeral, I noticed Ethan talking quietly with 2 men in expensive suits. Whenever I walked closer, they stopped talking. One of them handed Ethan a thick envelope. He quickly slipped it inside his jacket. When I asked, "Who were they?" he smiled. "Lawyers." Dad had unfinished business. Something about his answer didn't feel right, but I was too heartbroken to ask more questions. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I returned to my father's office. It still smelled like his coffee. His favorite leather chair sat exactly where he'd left it. On the desk, I noticed a family photograph. It had been turned upside down. I picked it up. Behind the frame, Dad had written something in black marker. Just 5 words. "Trust actions, never promises." A strange feeling settled in my chest. Why would he hide that message? The next morning, Ethan called everyone together. "We need to discuss Dad's estate." His voice sounded different, more confident, more impatient. We gathered in the dining room. 2 lawyers were already waiting. Stacks of documents covered the table. Ethan stood at the head of the room like he already owned everything. One lawyer smiled politely. "These are standard inheritance documents. We'd appreciate it if everyone signed today." I looked at the papers. There were dozens of pages. So many. The lawyer nodded. "Just routine legal formalities." Ethan added, "The company can't move forward until everything is signed." Mom looked exhausted. Sophia didn't even read a single page. She signed immediately. Both lawyers smiled. Then, everyone looked at me. I hesitated. Something inside me said, "Don't do it." At that exact moment, I remembered Dad's words. Trust actions, never promises. I picked up the first page. Before I could read it, Ethan sighed loudly. "Olivia, do we really have to make today harder? We just buried Dad." Mom wiped away fake tears. "Please. I can't handle more stress." Even Sophia whispered, "Just sign." Suddenly, 3 people I had trusted my entire life were pressuring me. I looked around the room. Every face. Waiting. Watching. Judging. Finally, I gave in. I signed. Every page. Without reading a single word. It became the biggest mistake of my life. The following morning, I drove back to my childhood home. I wanted Dad's old watch. The one he wore every single day. As I pulled into the driveway, something immediately felt wrong. The front gate code didn't work. Confused, I walked to the front door. My key wouldn't fit. The locks had been changed. I knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened. Ethan stood there, wearing my father's robe, holding my father's coffee mug, smiling. Behind him, the entire house had already been rearranged. It was as if I had never lived there. "What happened?" I asked. He calmly handed me a white envelope. Inside was a copy of the documents I had signed. Across the top, one sentence made my blood run cold. Voluntary release of all inheritance rights. I looked up in disbelief. "What is this?" Ethan smiled. "You signed it. You gave us everything." Then, he slowly closed the front door in my face. I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe, until I heard the voice of our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. She quietly walked toward me, holding a small rusty key in her trembling hand. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then whispered, "Your father knew this day would come." Mrs. Henderson looked around nervously. Then she placed the small rusty key into my hand. It was old, covered in rust, and tied to a faded blue ribbon. My father always used blue ribbons. I stared at her. "What is this?" She whispered, "Your father gave it to me 2 years ago. He said, if anything ever happens to me and Olivia loses the house, give her this key." My heart skipped a beat. "What does it open?" She slowly pointed toward the back of the property. "The old garden shed." I frowned. "The shed? No one has opened it in over 20 years. Mrs. Henderson nodded. "And that's exactly why your father hid it there." I looked toward the backyard. The old wooden shed stood beneath a giant oak tree. Its roof was falling apart. The windows were covered with dust. As kids, Ethan and I used to play there. Dad suddenly locked it one summer. He told us, "It's full of dangerous tools." None of us ever questioned him. Now, I wondered if that had been another lie. Before I could walk away, Mrs. Henderson grabbed my arm. "Olivia, don't tell anyone about the key. Especially not Ethan. Your father didn't trust him." Those words hit me harder than anything else. My own father had expected betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything. Dad's hidden message, the rushed paperwork, the changed locks, the key. Nothing about this felt random anymore. At exactly 5:30 the next morning, before sunrise, I drove back to the property. The front gate was locked, but I knew another way in. As a child, Dad had built a small wooden gate behind the fence. Almost no one knew it existed. The gate was still there, hidden beneath thick vines. I climbed through quietly. Every step felt surreal. This had been my home. Now, I was sneaking into it like a stranger. The backyard looked abandoned. The flower garden Dad loved was full of weeds. The bird feeder hung empty. Then I saw it, the old shed, exactly as Mrs. Henderson described. Its rusty padlock hadn't been touched in years. I took out the key. My hands were trembling. For a second, I wondered if it wouldn't fit. Then, click, the lock opened. As I slowly pushed the door, a cloud of dust filled the air. Sunlight streamed through broken wooden boards. Old furniture, boxes, broken bicycles. Nothing unusual. I almost laughed at myself. Maybe this really was just an old storage shed. Then, something caught my eye. On the floor, near an old workbench, there were fresh footprints. Someone had been here recently. I carefully followed the footprints. They stopped in front of a large wooden cabinet. It looked far too heavy to move, but the floor beneath it had scratch marks, as if someone had pushed it recently. I took a deep breath, pushed with all my strength. The cabinet slowly slid aside. Behind it was a steel door, hidden inside the wall. I froze. A hidden room? Dad had never mentioned anything like this. There was another lock, the same blue ribbon symbol, carved into the metal. The rusty key fit perfectly. The door slowly opened. Inside, the room was surprisingly clean. There was electricity, a desk, shelves, a safe, several filing cabinets, and on the desk, a white envelope. Across the front, in my father's handwriting, were 5 words, for Olivia and only Olivia. My eyes filled with tears. I carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, it means I was right. Someone in our family betrayed you. I'm sorry I couldn't stop it myself. I stopped reading. My vision blurred. Dad knew. He had known all along. I continued. Never believe anyone who says I left you nothing. Because I didn't. Everything you need is inside this room. But be careful. The people who stole this house will stop at nothing to protect their lies. At the bottom, Dad had written one final sentence. Trust the red file before you trust any lawyer. I immediately looked around. There were dozens of files. Blue, black, green, gray. Then, on the highest shelf, I spotted a single red folder. Just as I reached for it, I heard something outside. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps. Someone was walking toward the shed. Then I heard Ethan's voice. She's here. Another man answered. Search everywhere. My heart stopped. They knew. Someone had seen me enter the property. I quickly grabbed the red file, turned off the light, and held my breath. The shed door slowly creaked open. I could hear Ethan getting closer. 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 Then his voice echoed through the room. Olivia, I know you're hiding in here. Olivia, I know you're hiding in here. Ethan's voice echoed through the old shed. My heart pounded so hard. I thought he could hear it. I stayed perfectly still behind the steel door. The red file was pressed tightly against my chest. I couldn't let him find it. Not now. Not ever. The shed door creaked open. Heavy footsteps moved across the wooden floor. One step, then another. Dust floated through the sunlight as Ethan searched every corner. Another man spoke behind him. Maybe Mrs. Henderson lied. Ethan's voice turned cold. She didn't. My father left something, and Olivia is looking for it. I cover my mouth to stop myself from breathing too loudly. So, he knew about the hidden room, but not where it was. After several tense minutes, the other man said, There's nothing here. Ethan kicked an old toolbox across the floor. Damn it. Keep watching the house. If Olivia finds whatever Dad hid, we're finished. They walked out. The shed. Doors slammed shut. I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Only then did I slowly step out. Back inside the secret room. I locked the steel door. Then I finally opened the red file. The first page made my hands tremble. Across the top, it read, Confidential investigation. Investigation? Into what? Or, into whom? Every page contained bank records, property transfers, emails, photographs. The deeper I read, the more my world collapsed. My father had secretly hired a private investigator 3 years before he died, not to investigate a business rival, but his own family. The report began with my mother. It revealed she had secretly withdrawn hundreds of thousands of dollars from company accounts. Money Dad believed had gone toward investments. Instead, she had spent it on luxury vacations, designer jewelry, and gambling. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The next section was about Sophia. My younger sister. According to the investigator, she had been leaking confidential company information to Ethan. In exchange, he paid off her debts. Every time Dad trusted her with important documents, they ended up in Ethan's hands. Then, I reached Ethan's file. It was nearly twice as thick as the others. The first photograph showed him meeting with a real estate developer. The next showed him signing contracts behind Dad's back. Another page listed fake companies, each one secretly controlled by Ethan. Money had been disappearing from Dad's business for years. Millions of dollars. Not thousands, millions. At the very bottom, Dad had written a note in red ink. Ethan isn't waiting for me to die. He's helping make it happen. I dropped the file. No. There had to be some mistake. Dad couldn't possibly mean that. Could he? Shaking, I opened the next envelope. Inside was a small USB drive. Attached to it was another handwritten note. Watch this only when you're alone. Fortunately, an old laptop sat on the desk. I plugged in the drive. There was only one video. I clicked play. My father appeared on the screen. He looked older, weaker, but his eyes were clear. He smiled sadly. Hello, Olivia. If you're watching this, I'm gone. Tears rolled down my face. Hearing his voice again broke something inside me. He continued, I know you'll have 1,000 questions. The first one is probably, why didn't I stop them? He sighed deeply. I tried. But every time I confronted Ethan, he became more dangerous. I realized something. This wasn't just greed anymore. It was obsession. Dad reached for a folder beside him. If you're holding the red file, then you've already discovered part of the truth. But not all of it. He looked directly into the camera. The biggest secret isn't inside that file. It's inside my office. I frowned. My office. Dad nodded. There is another safe. No one knows it exists. Not even Ethan. He smiled gently. You'll need my old watch. The one you always loved as a little girl. The combination is hidden inside it. Suddenly, everything made sense. I had gone back to the house to get Dad's watch. But Ethan had changed the locks before I could. He knew. He had known exactly what I was looking for. Dad's expression became serious. If Ethan discovers the second safe, everything I've spent years protecting will disappear. He paused, then said the words I will never forget. Don't trust the family lawyer. He's been working with Ethan for over 2 years. My blood ran cold. The lawyer, the inheritance papers, the fake signatures. It had all been planned. Just as the video ended, my phone vibrated. It was an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello. A frightened woman's voice whispered, Is this Olivia Carter? Yes. You don't know me, but I worked for your father. My name is Sarah. I found something. What is it? She lowered her voice. I found the original will. My heart stopped. What? She continued. And Ethan is coming to destroy it. Before I could ask another question, the lines suddenly went dead. A second later, a text message appeared. It contained only one address and one terrifying sentence. If you want the truth, come alone. The text message stayed on my screen. If you want the truth, come alone. My instinct screamed not to go. But if Sarah really had my father's original will, I couldn't ignore it. Rebecca, my attorney, looked at me. This could be a trap. I nodded. I know. But if Ethan destroys that will, we lose everything. Rebecca sighed. Then you won't be going alone. An hour later, we parked across the street from an old storage warehouse. It was abandoned. The windows were broken. Half the lights no longer worked. Rebecca stayed outside with Detective Mason and 2 officers. If anything feels wrong, call immediately. I took a deep breath, then walked inside. The warehouse was silent. Only the sound of dripping water echoed through the empty building. Then, a woman stepped out from behind a stack of wooden crates. She looked terrified. Olivia? Sarah? She nodded quickly. We don't have much time. She handed me a thick brown envelope. I worked as your father's executive assistant for 12 years. He trusted me. He knew Ethan was stealing from him. I looked at the envelope. Inside was my father's original last will and testament. My hands started shaking. I opened the first page. It was completely different from the copy Ethan's lawyer had shown us. The first sentence read, "I leave my family home entirely to my daughter, Olivia Carter." Tears filled my eyes. I kept reading. My father had also left me 40% of the company. Another 40% went into a charitable foundation. Ethan received only 10%. Sophia received 10%. My mother, nothing. No wonder they wanted me to sign those papers. Sarah whispered, "Your father changed his will 6 months before he died. He found proof that Ethan had stolen millions. He said he couldn't trust him anymore." I looked at her. Why didn't anyone know? She lowered her head. Because the family lawyer betrayed him. He secretly gave Ethan a copy. My heart sank. Dad had been surrounded by betrayal long before he died. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. Sarah's face turned pale. "He's here." What? Ethan followed me. Before I could react, the warehouse doors burst open. Ethan walked inside. Behind him were 3 large men. He smiled slowly. "I knew you'd come." He looked at the envelope in my hands. There it is. The original will. He stretched out his hand. "Give it to me." I stood my ground. "No." His smile disappeared. "You really think you can stop me? You already stole the house. What makes you think you can keep anything else?" He took another step. His voice became cold. "You should have signed the papers." And disappeared. But instead, you started digging. He laughed. "You've always been just like Dad. Always asking questions. Always believing people tell the truth." I looked him straight in the eyes. "No, I believed family tells the truth. You proved me wrong." For a brief second, his face changed. Then he nodded toward one of the men. "Take the envelope." The man rushed toward me. Before he could reach me, the warehouse filled with shouting. Police, Detective Mason, and several officers stormed inside. The 3 men immediately tried to run. Within seconds, they were on the ground in handcuffs. Ethan stood frozen. His confidence vanished. Detective Mason walked toward him. "Ethan Carter, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, conspiracy, destruction of evidence, and financial theft." Ethan laughed nervously. "You have no proof." Rebecca stepped forward. "Oh, we have plenty." She held up the original will, the forged inheritance documents, the investigator's report, the bank transfers, the fake signatures. And she smiled. "Your father's hidden video." Ethan's face turned white. As officers searched the warehouse, one detective shouted, "Sir, we found several boxes. Inside were company files, property deeds, hard drives, and industrial shredders." The detective opened another box. Everyone fell silent. It contained dozens of burned legal documents. Detective Mason looked at Ethan. "You've been destroying evidence." Ethan didn't answer. Then, one officer opened a black briefcase lying beside Ethan's car keys. Inside was my father's Rolex watch, the very watch I had returned to the house to collect. My eyes widened. Rebecca whispered, "The watch." I immediately remembered my father's video. "You'll need my old watch. The combination is hidden inside it." That meant the secret safe in Dad's office could finally be opened. But Detective Mason looked at the watch for a long moment, then quietly said, "I don't think this watch is the biggest surprise." He reached deeper into the briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope marked, "Confidential. Open only if Richard Carter's death is suspicious." My heart stopped. I looked at Ethan. For the first time, he wasn't angry. He looked terrified. My hands trembled as Detective Mason held up the sealed envelope. Across the front, my father's handwriting read, "Open only if my death is suspicious." The entire warehouse fell silent. Even Ethan stopped breathing. Detective Mason carefully broke the seal. Inside was another letter and a small flash drive. Rebecca inserted the flash drive into her laptop. A video appeared. My father was sitting in his office. He looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this, it means I was right. I don't believe my death was natural. The room froze. Dad continued. For the past 2 years, I've been slowly poisoned. My knees almost gave out. No. Dad held up several medical reports. My personal doctor found traces of poison in my blood. He advised me to report it, but I didn't. I wanted to know who was responsible. Tears streamed down my face. He knew someone wanted him dead. He continued speaking. I installed hidden cameras inside my office. If anything happens to me, the recordings are inside the second safe. And the combination is hidden inside my Rolex watch. Everyone looked at the watch lying on the table. Rebecca carefully opened the back cover. Hidden inside was a tiny folded piece of paper. 4 numbers. 1 to 9, 7 to 4. My father's birth year. That same afternoon, the police escorted us back to my childhood home. For the first time, Ethan wasn't walking through the front door. He was wearing handcuffs. Neighbors watched from their windows. Nobody said a word. We entered Dad's office. Rebecca walked to the old bookshelf, exactly where Dad had described. Behind it was a hidden safe. I entered the combination. 1974. The lock clicked open. Inside were hard drives, cash, property deeds, and another folder labeled Security Recordings. Detective Mason connected the hard drive. The first video showed Dad's office 3 nights before he died. At 11:42 p.m., the office door slowly opened. Ethan walked inside. He looked around carefully, then removed a small bottle from his pocket. He poured a clear liquid into Dad's favorite whiskey bottle. I covered my mouth. Oh my God. Another recording showed the family lawyer entering the office an hour later. He removed documents from Dad's desk, then replaced them with forged inheritance papers. Everything had been recorded. Every crime, every betrayal. Ethan finally broke down. He buried his face in his hands. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Detective Mason looked at him. You poisoned your own father. Ethan started crying. I only wanted him sick, so he'd retire. I didn't think he'd actually die. His confession echoed through the room. My mother collapsed into a chair. Sophia burst into tears. The truth had finally destroyed the lies they had spent years building. 3 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every seat. The evidence was overwhelming. The hidden videos, the forged documents, the bank records, the original will, and Ethan's own confession. The judge didn't take long. Ethan was convicted of financial fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and crimes related to his father's death. The family lawyer lost his license and was sentenced for his role in the fraud. Sophia accepted responsibility for helping hide financial records and cooperated with investigators. My mother was ordered to repay the money she had unlawfully taken from the company. Dad's original will was officially restored. The house was returned to me. The company followed exactly as Dad had intended. His charitable foundation was finally created, just like he dreamed. 6 months later, I stood in the front yard of my childhood home. The flowers were blooming again. The old oak tree still stood proudly. Mrs. Henderson smiled from across the street. I told you, your father was always one step ahead. I smiled through tears. He never stopped protecting me. Inside the house, I placed Dad's favorite photograph back on the fireplace. Beside it, I placed his old Rolex watch, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a reminder of his wisdom. On the back of the watch, I noticed tiny engraved words I had never seen before. The greatest inheritance isn't money, it's the truth. I gently smiled. He was right. They stole my home. They stole my trust. They even tried to erase me from my own family. But they couldn't steal the one thing my father left me, the truth. And in the end, the truth destroyed every lie they had built.